Have you ever noticed how the term Islamophobia is like just thrown around, especially when there's tension between, Muslim and non-Muslim nations?
Yeah, it's often used, it feels like, to shut down a conversation, doesn't it,
Yeah.
before it even begins.
It's like a quick judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when the conflict is between Muslim groups themselves? Where's the outrage then?
Hmm. It's a really fascinating point. It seems like the lens that we're looking at these conflicts through is often clouded by preconceived narratives, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's precisely what these two YouTube videos we're looking at. They got us thinking about this. One really dives deep into the turmoil that's brewing in Pakistan right now.
Right.
And the other shines a light on the Kurdish struggle for an independent homeland.
Yeah, both videos raise some really uncomfortable questions about these accusations of Islamophobia. Like, are we maybe missing a much bigger, more complex picture?
Okay, so let's unpack this. The first video is called Finally Pakistan Broken into Three Parts. It paints a really bleak picture of what's happening over there.
Right. They're facing this escalating violence from the TTP,
Right.
the Taliban Pakistan.
Yes.
The video claims over 1,200 Pakistani soldiers have been killed just this past year.
Yeah, and I mean, that number, while shocking, it's not entirely out of context. I mean, the TTP, they have strong ties to the Afghan Taliban.
Right.
And they've been gaining ground really ever since the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Essentially, they're waging war against the Pakistani government.
Right.
And the impact is spilling over into regions like Waziristan and Balochistan.
Yeah, and the video even shows this map highlighting how much territory in these regions is just no longer under Pakistani control. And to add like another layer to this whole thing, Pakistan is trying to project strength by offering military assistance to Bangladesh, right?
Right, right.
Even while they're dealing with these serious internal struggles.
Yeah, it's almost like a classic case of trying to maintain a strong facade on the world stage, but like behind the scenes.
Yeah. They're really grappling with internal chaos. But, for you listening, this instability in Pakistan,
Yeah.
It has the potential to reach far beyond their borders. Think about the impact.
Yeah.
Refugee crises, increased terrorism.
Right.
And it just shifts the power dynamics in an already volatile region.
The ripple effects are huge. And then we shift gears to the second video, Muslim Turkey bombs Muslim Kurds.
Yeah.
This one really gets to the heart of the issue, I think. It argues that there's a glaring double standard in how we view violence when Muslims are involved.
Yes. The video zeroes in on the plight of the Kurds,
Right.
which is a largely Muslim ethnic group,
Right.
and how their suffering often seems to fall on deaf ears, especially when the aggressors are also Muslim.
It's like that narrative of Islamophobia just doesn't fit here, so it's easier to just look away.
Yeah, and this raises a really critical question. Why do some conflicts, grab global attention,
Right.
while others are essentially ignored?
Yeah.
What drives that selective outrage?
Yeah. And to hammer home that point, the video contrasts the worldwide reaction to the recent Hamas attack on Israel with the almost deafening silence surrounding Turkey's military operations against the Kurds.
Yeah.
The disparity is really striking.
Yeah. It's a powerful comparison. It forces us to think critically, right?
Yeah.
About the factors that determine which narratives gain traction and which are swept under the rug. Are there, geopolitical motives?
Yeah.
Economic interests, or just, deeply ingrained biases at play?
So where does this leave the Kurds? They've been striving for their own homeland, Kurdistan,
Yeah.
for generations.
Right.
But it feels like every time they get close, the rug is pulled out from under them,
Yeah.
often by the very powers that promise them autonomy.
Yeah, to truly understand their predicament, it's helpful to look back at their history. The Kurds have endured a long and tragic history of persecution and broken promises. After World War I, they were promised an independent Kurdistan,
Right.
but those promises crumbled. And the same scenario played out after they played a pivotal role in fighting ISIS, valued allies one minute and abandoned the next.
And the violence they faced is just horrific.
Oh, it's terrible.
The video reminds us of Saddam Hussein's brutal use of poison gas against Kurdish villages, which killed thousands of innocent people.
Yeah, and tragically, those atrocities, they haven't been relegated to the past. Turkey under President Erdogan has continued its military operations against Kurdish groups, displacing entire communities
Right.
and causing widespread suffering.
It's heartbreaking. It makes you wonder why aren't we talking about this more? Why isn't there more pressure on Turkey to stop these attacks?
Yeah.
Where's the outcry?
It circles back to that selective outrage, that we were discussing earlier. The Turkish government, they frame these operations as counterterrorism efforts,
Right.
but human rights groups have documented countless abuses against civilians.
So it seems like a convenient way to silence dissent and justify actions that would otherwise be condemned on the world stage.
Absolutely. It raises a lot of questions, and this is where it gets really interesting. Think about how terms like Islamophobia can be used sometimes not as a reflection of genuine discrimination, but as a political tactic.
Oh, are you saying that these claims of Islamophobia are sometimes used to deflect legitimate criticism,
Yeah,
to shut down important conversations?
precisely. We need to be careful not to conflate genuine prejudice against Muslims with valid concerns about actions carried out by individuals or groups who happen to be Muslim.
Right.
Blurring that line actually prevents us from addressing real issues and engaging in productive dialogue.
That video we discussed about Turkey's actions against the Kurds was particularly unsettling. It's hard to believe that a NATO member can carry out those kinds of operations with barely a whisper of condemnation from the international community. It really highlights the inconsistencies and double standards that often surface when it comes to conflicts within the Muslim world. As we talked about earlier, the use of terms like Islamophobia can sometimes act as a shield deflecting scrutiny from these countries, even when they're engaging in human rights abuses against their own people.
It's almost as if there's a reluctance to intervene in what's perceived as an internal Muslim matter, even when those internal matters involve egregious human rights violations.
That's a perceptive observation, and it creates a dangerous situation where vulnerable groups like the Kurds find themselves with very few options for recourse or protection.